Good evening. Thanks for joining us. I'm Stone Grissom. Well, the Democrats in Albany now have complete control of state government. Here with me now is one of those Democrats who helped make that happen, State Senator Jim Gaughran. Now, the senator represents the 5th District, which covers the North Shore of Long Island. So, welcome, Senator, State Senator, through Power and Politics.
Glad to be here.
You are the former chairman of the Suffolk County Water Authority.
Yes.
Very responsible position. You were doing a lot of very important work. What made you decide to go from that position and say, I'd like to run for state senate?
Well, you know, well over 25 years ago, I was an elected official. I served 3 terms in the Suffolk County Legislature, and I was a Huntington Town councilman. And I just decided, with all the corruption in Albany and dysfunction, that I would take a shot at to see if I could get back into public office and try to contribute in a bigger way than I was with the Water Authority. It was a great position, and we did a lot of good things there. But I think at the state level, I'm able to perhaps advance issues dealing with water quality, but so many other areas.
Now, you came in kind of in a wave, a Democratic wave in 2018. Now 6 of the 9 legislators on Long Island are Democrat. What are the big issues for Democrats, and are you satisfied so far with what you've accomplished?
I think the biggest issue we have so far is just the taxes on Long Island. When the Trump administration took away most of the SALT deduction, limiting everybody to just $10,000 of their state and local income taxes, that put a tremendous amount of pressure on Long Island families who were already had a lot of pressure. And so one of the first things we did, and I sponsored the law, was to make the 2% property tax cap permanent. And I think that is something that is very important for Long Islanders. All
right, we have several questions involving that and other questions.
We went out to jump ahead then.
Right, so let's start off with this soundbite. This is from Victor of Uniondale, a question from Victor, and I'll ask you a question, respond to it on the other side.
Sure.
What can we do about gun control laws to help strengthen them without taking away the actual guns? People still need to feel protected and things like that. So how can we better our gun control laws for the state of New York?
Well, most of that we took care of early on in the legislative session. Look, I fully support the Second Amendment. Everybody has the right to protect themselves. Sportsmen, sportswomen have the right to go out. But the real issue is that with the tragedies we have had in schools and so many other places, we really need to get a limitation on the use of them by certain people.
So you think our gun control laws right now in New York State are strong enough?
New York State is very strong based on what we just passed. We need changes in Washington because you can bring a gun in from any place.
That was going to be my follow-up question. How do you deal with that? If New York State has strong gun laws, and Connecticut does as well, but North Carolina doesn't necessarily, how do you stop that?
Until we get Congress to take action and to apply further restrictions. We're continuing to have a problem here in New York, but we eliminated not only a lot of guns by taking them out of people whose hands it shouldn't be in, but we passed other more sensitive measures. For example, the red flag law. It is a law that simply says that if somebody is deemed somebody who has a gun, if it's deemed that perhaps they don't have the capacity to hold on to that gun, that they may be a threat either to themselves or to others, there's a judicial process now, whether it's a teacher or a police officer or a family member can bring this information forward. This person will have the right to go before a judge, will have full due process, and if that judge feels that that individual could harm him or herself or somebody else, then the gun will be taken away on a temporary basis. This is a direct response to what happened with the tragedy in Parkland, because in Parkland, and some of these other incidents, including up in Newtown, Connecticut, with all the kids, there were signs, there were, quote, red flags that everybody was talking about after the fact, but they said, but we really didn't know where to go or what to do. Now in New York, we have set up a process exactly for that, and I believe it will save lives.
All right, so let's go to our next question. This is from Nancy in Merrick.
As Long Islanders, we pay high taxes, and a lot of people were hit hard this year. So I'd like to know what's being done to reduce and alleviate taxes for Long Islanders.
Well, I mentioned earlier the 2%
touched on
property tax cap. I think that is an important law because I think without that law, our property taxes would be much higher. And municipalities and school districts, it creates challenges for them, but in the past they've worked through this, and I think it's just an important tool as we go forward because our property taxes are just getting higher and higher, and without the property tax cap, I'm really concerned, especially since we have dramatically lost much of our ability to deduct our state and local taxes.
And that's the SALT deduction. It's capped at $10,000.
Right. The other thing that we did in this state budget, there was a lot of pressure on the legislature, on the Senate, to spend money in a lot of areas, and there's a lot of important things we could spend money on, a lot of things we do need to do in the future. But we, especially the 6 Democrats on Long Island, stood together and said, you know what, we really can't afford at this time to do many of the things we wanted to do because one of the options would be to just raise income taxes, and to do that we just felt would be counterproductive.
Let me ask you this, on the topic of taxes, a large portion, almost 3/4 of our taxes are really school district taxes. Is part of the problem that we have 124 school districts on Long Island with separate superintendents? I mean, is that an issue that we should be looking at, or is that something that we deal with that and we just move on?
You know what? Long Island has always had a tradition, as most of the rest of the state, to have local school boards, local autonomy, and I think that's very important. But one of the areas where I think the state can be directly involved in trying to reduce the burden is to, over time, increase the amount of money that the state provides to local school districts in terms of state aid. And we were able to provide a record amount this year to Long Island pretty much across the board. We need to continue that and do more of that, and I think we should start increasing the amount that we send to local school districts and then have that money used to reduce the property tax level. That's going to take time. But I think over time we can do that. Right now we're in some difficult economic period, but I think as we move out of that, we really need to address the situation of trying to reduce the amount of money that comes out of the property taxes by increasing the amount of money that the state provides in aid.
All right, let's go down to some of our Facebook questions. This is from Jenna on our Facebook page. I would like to know why you would campaign to back the NYHA, that's the New York Health Act, and then back away after being elected. Why are you dodging the questions being asked of you? We all trusted you and voted for you. Now we all feel that we have been cheated again. That's her perspective of the question.
Absolutely, and I respect her question. The New York Health Act in its current form before the state Senate is significantly different than what was out during the campaign in that it has added significant more costs because it has included long-term care, which is dramatically going to increase the costs of the New York Health Act. My concern with it, the way it's being proposed, is mostly with the funding aspect. The way it is proposing to tax various people in various different ways, I think could be harmful to the people I represent. It has an undue burden, I believe, on the middle class, on people who are self-employed, and especially senior citizens, who for years have been paying Social Security, have been paying for their Medicare that they're now entitled to, and to ask them now to pay an additional tax on top of that, that is a concern I have. One of the things we have done, and we need to make sure that we insure everybody, and we also deal with the people who are underinsured. So one of the things that we recently did was we codified the Affordable Care Act because, as you know, there are threats to basically eliminate it coming out of Washington. So that's something that we did. But my main concern with the New York Health Act as it is now proposed is that it is being funded very heavily for middle-class families on Long Island. I would rather see a funding more in line with basically a premium basis, because the understanding of the New York Health Act is that the vast majority of people will actually pay less than they are paying now. And I'm concerned that the way it is being funded, for many of my constituents, it would be the opposite. They will be paying more, and it could be dramatically more.
Is it something we can fix, or is it something that...
I think it's something we can fix, because I think we need to move to something that's more on a premium basis, something that An individual would pay an amount, a married couple would pay a certain amount, a couple with children would then pay an amount similar to premiums, and then we make sure that there's a lesser amount paid by the people who can't afford, by the working poor, but it is something that I think is more equitable as opposed to penalizing the middle class with a tax that they might not be able to afford.
Okay, we have many more questions coming up, but we're going to take a quick break. We'll be right back with more from State Senator Jim Gaughran when News 12's Power in Politics continues. Welcome back to News 12's Power in Politics. Once again, I'm joined by State Senator Jim Gaughran. Jim represents the 5th District, which covers the North Shore of Long Island. So appreciate you taking the time. I want to give you a chance if you had anything more to say about the New York Health Act. We were just talking about that.
We need to move towards universal health care, and I'm just concerned about the way we're funding it. We need to find a way that we can fund it so that it doesn't break the back of middle-class taxpayers.
Okay, well, let's go on. We have some more viewer questions. Again, this is from Facebook. Jamie Marcantonio asked this question. Oh, actually, we're going to move to Eddie for Senator Gaughran right now.
My name is Eddie, and my question is, when are you going to start legalizing recreational marijuana use in New York State?
Well, Eddie, that's a very hot topic right now before the New York State Legislature. Here are the concerns that I have. I've spent a lot of time meeting with PTAs, school administrators, teachers. There's a big concern about the vaping that's going on in our schools now, the flavored vaping, and they really want to get a handle on that. And they're concerned with legalizing marijuana, even though it would be for 21 and over. As you know, products still end up, getting to our schools, and they don't think they have the ability to handle that right now. Most of them. The other issue of concern is with our law enforcement. Our law enforcement is saying that they don't have the tools to particularly deal with the driving while impaired, and the experience in Colorado is that there has been a significant increase in driving while impaired and in serious accidents. Different than driving while intoxicated. There is a breathalyzer, there is a blood test. You can basically get evidence that can be used in court when somebody is accused of this. With marijuana, it could be in your system for 30 days or more, and we don't have the same tools, so it would be totally based on the observations of a police officer, and there are concerns. Maybe somebody's having a bad day. Maybe somebody's on a legal prescription medicine, but it looks like that they may be impaired. So these are issues that have to be sorted out. And one of the items that's out there is that there is an experimental test dealing with saliva, so that the police officer could actually take a swab at the scene, similar to a breathalyzer. That really hasn't been certified for New York courts yet. It costs over $5,000 each. That would be a tremendous additional cost, to our counties. The other thing I think that is important is that we need to give communities the ability to opt out, because without that...
And both Nassau and Suffolk have said they would opt out.
Nassau and Suffolk have said that, but I also want to see that towns and villages, have rights as well, as if this is going to move forward, because they have control over their own zoning, and I don't want to see the state sort of usurping that authority. So there are a lot of questions concerning this, and moving quickly towards legalizing marijuana is something I'm concerned about. Look, I recognize that people are smoking. There isn't as much enforcement of it as there have been in the past.
Keeping it criminalized? Recreational
use?
Well,
no, I believe we should go towards decriminalization, for, just the use of it, not sales and some
so
of the
possession
other
would be
things
okay, not criminalizing that, but just not allowing the sales
right,
of it.
But at this point, to move forward at all, we really have to fix the law enforcement piece as well.
What do you say to critics who say, okay, what if the neighboring states legalize it, and it's not hard to go to New Jersey, not hard to go to Connecticut and get it? We're just missing out on all that revenue that we desperately need here in the state.
Well, one of the fallacies about the revenue is, and I really learned this when I got to the state Senate, is that there really isn't this big pot of money that we could use towards education. If we actually did legalize it, a tremendous amount of that money, if not all of it, is going to have to go into healthcare. It's going to have go into helping people with addiction, and it's going to have to go into the law enforcement piece. So it isn't sure whether there would actually be any additional revenues other than what would be necessary to enforce the law.
Okay. Is it still under consideration in the legislature, or is it kind of dead on arrival at this point?
It was considered in the governor's budget. It was removed from the governor's budget. As you know, the budget is more than just the money. It's also a policy document, and there are proposals before the Senate now that we will be considering.
Okay. All right, let's go to another question. This one is from Daniel regarding the minimum wage.
I'm looking to see what you guys are doing to increase the minimum wage out here in Long Island. I know in Westchester it's a little more, it's 12 down here. I'm just interested to know because I know the taxes up here are even higher in Long Island, so I want to know why the minimum wage is so low.
Well, the minimum wage is, moving towards $15 an hour. That was adopted before I got into the state legislature. There aren't, as far as I know, any proposals right now to increase it even more. But it's something that I think we have to address moving forward. But the big thing we have to do is to try to provide more economic development, more jobs locally, and that's something that we need to
Now,
address.
Long Island is one of the most expensive places to live in the nation. Is $15 an hour even a livable wage at this point here on Long Island?
It's very tough to live on just $15 an hour, and certainly people are working 2-3 jobs in many cases just to survive. But obviously, we have to balance these policies with making sure that we keep our business here, and I think creating more economic opportunities is the future.
Okay, so let's go now to Ephraim from Rockville Center.
Why are the trains so loud? It seems they've been repairing like the E and the F train for like 10, 15 years, and they still haven't finished. What's taking so long? It's like every time I want to go in the city, I try to save gas and be ecological, park in Forest Hills, and then I get on the train and it takes an hour, which should take 25 minutes because they're always repairing them.
I get asked this question all the time, and often it is, why have you not done anything for years? You have not done anything about this, and I have to explain, well, I've only been here for 4 months, and he's absolutely right.
And you haven't solved the problem?
He is absolutely right. The current service on the Long Island Railroad is just continuing to decline. Rates are going up, which is unfair, which I oppose. That's why in this budget, we did a couple of things. One thing we did was we passed the Rail Act. What the Rail Act does is, among other things, is it provides for a forensic audit so that we will bring in an outside independent auditor to look across the board at the way the Long Island Railroad is operating. Are they wasting money on outside consultants? And there's millions of dollars spent on outside consultants. Are they top-heavy with management? We had one of the first Senate hearings in decades on Long Island dealing with the Long Island Railroad. And I asked the management if they had a policy as it related to when they maybe eliminate management positions, even when somebody might retire. What was their policy towards when they would bring in an outside consultant? And I didn't get any straight answers, and we're waiting for them to give us this. But we just think there's a tremendous amount of money that is being wasted. And also, the men and women who run the railroad every single day, and in fact, I was at this train station this morning in Glen Cove greeting commuters with a transit survey to try to get information. I met with some of the railroad workers. These people work hard, and they're not the problem. The problem is that I think with some folks in the management, there just isn't enough foresight. Right. So, but one of the other things we did with the budget is now there is $4 billion more going to Long Island for capital programs. So we're looking to expand the electrification wherever we can, particularly on the Port Jefferson line. And I'm looking for major improvements for the Oyster Bay line as well.
All right, we appreciate your time. Thank you very much, State Senator Jim Gaughran. That's it for Power in Politics. We'll be right back.